If you like this kind of content, please consider supporting me on Patreon, where you'll get early access to my tutorials as well as the unedited full-length videos. Hey guys, welcome back to this third part of the making of Obi-Wan Kenobi tutorial series. In this video we're going to go through some of my sculpting techniques that I use to really get the most out of my texturing XYZ maps. We're also going to go more in depth with the final stage of our likeness process, as well as getting some expression in the eyes. So we're going to continue where we left off in the last video by creating a new layer for some new sculpting details. At a fairly low subdivision, I'm going to go through my model and look out for any of the forms that are sticking out between the secondary and micro details that might not be aligning with our displacement map from our texturing XYZ work. I can see straight away that there's a little bit too much volume under the middle forehead wrinkle that I want to reduce. By using the standard brush, any brush stroke that I perform will move the surface of the model without destroying the information of the smaller details, so this is a really nice brush to use for this job. Wrinkles on the forehead, especially in older characters, will be affected by gravity. There's always going to be a very slight overhang to the fat and tissue above the line of the wrinkle where gravity is pushing down upon it. I've drawn this image just as a quick visualizer. This is a cross section of the skin on the forehead. Usually when I see detailing from newer sculpting artists, they tend to draw an even depth to their wrinkle, which can make it look a little bit flat and unnatural. What we want to see is a little bit of overhang of fat and tissue just above the line where gravity is taking effect. When you're doing this, it has to be extremely subtle. It's easy to get carried away with this, and also everybody's skin is different, so you have to really pay attention to what's happening in your reference. Male skin is a little bit coarser than female skin, so you're going to see this effect a little bit more if you're working on a male character. The next brush that I use is the damn standard brush, with a moderate intensity and a very small radius. This is where our texturing XYZ maps come in really handy. At the highest subdivision, I want to use the damp standard brush to start creating some very fine lines between the pores. The build-up of these fine lines creates deeper wrinkles, which gives us a really natural look when we're detailing the skin. You're not just drawing a line on the surface of the model, but you're collapsing one pore into the next pore whilst also preserving the tissue that surrounds it. Pores on the face have a certain flow. No pore is perfectly round. They're all joined by micro wrinkles in the direction that the skin is being contracted or stretched by the movement of the muscles underneath. For example, the flow lines on the skin at the top of the nose are horizontal because they're affected by the brows pushing down in a grimace facial expression. However, just above that, the flow lines are pointing upwards because of the two brow muscles at either side pushing together in a frowning facial expression, causing the pores to collapse in the middle. The texturing XYZ maps are great to help you to visualize these flow lines. They already show you the direction that the skin is moving in, so it's really easy to add more natural looking wrinkles to that already existing flow. Unfortunately, the XYZ maps don't come with a lot of detail on the neck, unless you buy some extra packs. So we're going to have to go in and use our own reference here and hand sculpt in the detail. I'll start off with the standard brush and just try and block in some of the larger forms and wrinkles. By adding some noise to the neck to simulate the pores, I'll then use the damp standard brush to go in and sculpt those micro wrinkle flow lines between them. I always feel like this is a good way to start off. Luckily for me, a large portion of the neck will be covered by cloth, so I don't really need to work on this area too much. I thought that the lips were looking a little bit too crunchy with the blue channel displacement map. So I'm going to go in with a low intensity smooth brush and just smooth out those areas that have really fine details. I'll come back to the lips a little bit later and add some hand sculpted details so that it's closer to our reference. I like to move around my model a lot during this first pass of fixes. It helps me to understand the areas a little bit better and to get a general overview of all the fixes that might need to be made later on. Sometimes the cleanup work that we did in Mari might not be good enough yet, and there might be some unnatural deformations that are happening on our model that might be easier to fix back in Mari than in Zbrush. So I think moving around the model after the maps have been displaced is always a good idea to help save on any potential wasted time. I'm starting to work around the eyes now, using the damp standard brush to define the larger wrinkles and details that make up the crow's feet and the laugh lines, as well as adding in some volumes above some of the heavier wrinkles around the eyes to simulate gravity's effect, just like I did with the forehead wrinkles with the standard brush. I think I'm more or less happy with the overall look of the details from the maps, and I've done a quick assessment of which areas need more detail, so I'm going to start focusing now on these individual areas, starting with the eyes. When it comes to hand sculpting detail, I think it's best to use one main image from your reference folder, and if you can find one, maybe a second image to refer to, in the same pose and the same facial expression. The forms on the face can change so much just with the slightest difference in facial expression, so using too many images can make your sculpt look a little bit muddy. The eyes are always the last thing that I'll break the symmetry on. With the expression, I want to make sure that I get all the major forms and volumes of the lower eyelids in on both sides, just to make my life a little bit easier going forward. I like to start off in a low subdivision first and then work my way up, refining as I go until I absolutely must work asymmetrically. This detailing process is just a mix of all the sculpting techniques that I've used in the past. I'm using my reference to line up to and move in those smaller forms into position with the move brush. I'm using the standard brush to add in some volumes to areas, and the damp standard brush to sculpt in the creases and wrinkles of the skin. Now that all the major forms of the eyelids are in position, I think I'm finally ready to break the symmetry on the eyes. It's very rare that you'll find someone who has perfectly symmetrical eyes. In Ewan's case, his left eye, or screen right eye, is slightly higher than the other one. You might also find in your reference that one of the eyes is recessed back further than the other one. This will be very, very subtle, but it's something to be conscious of, especially when you're lining up your reference. I'm going to select the eyeballs in the subtool palette and create some polygroups in the polygroups panel by clicking auto group by UVs. I'll then select the polygroup that I want, and then I'll use the move tool to translate the eye upwards. Using the shift key will align to the ZBrush x-axis. I'm then going to go into my head model subtool, and with the move brush selected with a large radius, I'll move the eyelids up to match the eyeball. It's important to take your time getting the larger shapes of the eyelids in the correct position at a lower subdivision level first. Sometimes we can fight against the asymmetrical nature of the face, but as long as it matches up to the reference, it will make detailing it much easier. This detailing stage is quite a slow process, but the eyes are so important to get right that I'm happy to spend my time here. It's all about just looking at the reference and trying to get that in your sculpt. Adding in small volumes where the eyelids are bunching, or defining the creases where the forms separate. It's very subtle work, but all these small details will add up to a big change. Like I mentioned in the first video, skin and muscle are volume preserving. It's important to look out for the different facial expressions that will shift the volumes from one place to another. In the case of the squinting eyes, the volumes underneath the eyelids will be pushed up and in, which results in the volume in the lower eyelids to be pushed out and squashed. Just like with the forehead, I'm using the damp standard brush with a moderate intensity and a very small radius, and I'm just using it to lightly carve out the wrinkles on the eyelids. Already having a little bit of noise breakup on the surface of the skin in these areas really makes the process a lot easier and a lot more natural looking too. Skin is always deceptive to look at. Because of the subsurface scattering that's happening in our photograph reference, it makes it difficult to see how much depth and volume there is to the smaller details. When our brains are trying to determine the scale and depth to small shapes, it will automatically look for the highlights on the surface to give us an idea of how much the detail extrudes outwards. And it will also look for the shadow of the detail to determine how much depth there is to the surface. Unfortunately, anything that has subsurface scattering happening diffuses out that light inside the skin. On light skin, the specular reflection looks more washed out and gives us the impression that the detail doesn't have as much volume. The shadow of the skin is often softened and can give us the impression that the detail doesn't have much depth. It's really important to keep this in mind when you're sculpting details from reference. Reference with harder light sources, like the sun or a spotlight, will give you a better impression of what's happening on the surface, and a softer light, like an overcast day or a softbox, will make reading the details much more difficult. I'll usually focus on one side first when I'm working on the eyes. I'll get it to a certain point and then match that level of detail on the opposite side. I'll block in the larger forms with the standard brush and then use the move brush to get them into a closer position to the reference, and then I'll use the damp standard brush to refine them. I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, just because I'm using the exact same process on this eye as I did with the other eye. For anybody that's interested in the unedited videos, they're available on my Patreon now. Using the damp standard brush with the Alt key and a larger radius can give us a really nice creasing effect, which is great to use on the upper overhangs of the wrinkles, as well as where the skin bunches up in the corner of the eyes when squinting. Again, these lines where the skin is bunching up in the corner of the eyes when the person is squinting is the exact same phenomenon that's happening with the flow lines of the pores. And you'll notice that by following these flow lines with your details, it will give you a more natural look. Whenever I make changes at a certain level of detail to one side, I like to replicate those changes onto the other. There's no real trick to doing this detail work. It's really just looking at your reference and trying to replicate it. And like I said in the first video, this detailing stage is never truly done. Even when I'm inside of Maya and I'm starting to render, under new lighting conditions, I'll see new things that I've missed. And I'll just go back and forth between Maya and Zbrush and continually correct my model. Once I'm happy with the level of detail on the eyes, I'll once again work around the model, looking at my reference and adding in any details that I might have missed. I'm working on the crease now between the eyes, using the flow lines of the XYZ maps to help me define those extra details. Wherever there's a large crease or wrinkle, the areas surrounding it will always have more volume. I tend to focus mainly on getting the eyes and the lips correct in this detailing stage. Whilst other areas of the face are just as important, I tend to spend less time on one specific area. It becomes a process of adding multiple passes over time. Your eye needs time to rest, and by continually working on different areas, you'll start to see new things that you've previously missed. Having a good, high-resolution primary reference at this stage is essential. I'm using my reference to show me exactly where the wrinkles and small details are. Getting the wrinkles lined up and sculpted in the correct position is integral to a good likeness. I feel like this is something that a lot of artists brush over or fail to do. It's always surprising how much just getting these wrinkles in the correct place can improve your model and the overall likeness. Now it's time to work on the lips. There's a lot of folds and wrinkles that are missing on a sculpt, especially on the top lip, that we'll need to add in. A lot of the detail work on the top lip is just done by looking at multiple references on another monitor. The detail work doesn't have to be exact to the reference, and the reference itself doesn't have to be of the actor, but as long as it's of the same gender and the same skin color to the actor, it should be fine. I'm using the standard brush to push out the small folds on the top lip, and then I'm using the damp standard brush at multiple radiuses and intensities to create the small wrinkles. Sometimes it's beneficial to create a polygroup for both the top and the bottom lip and work on them separately, but it's not always necessary. The wrinkles on the lips become much deeper the further back that they go, and lighter towards the front. The flow lines are quite evenly spaced, flowing from the edges of the lip lines all the way back to inside the mouth. However, there are also deep wrinkles cutting straight across these flow lines that cause a kind of hashing effect. This method of using the standard and damp standard brush creates a really nice layering effect. The bottom lip is a little bit more important to work on than the top in terms of how much time you should spend on it. Depending on the pose of your character, the top lip is usually shadowing itself, so you don't really see a lot of detail in there. Whereas the bottom lip usually has a lot of light falling on it, and so therefore will be seen a lot more in your renders. I use the same techniques as the top lip for this lip, but I pay much closer attention to my reference of the actor, as even a detail as small as this can help towards getting a good likeness. The bottom lip structure tends to be quite different than the top lip. Whilst the flow lines are similar, the overall folds and small forms are a lot more subtle. The skin is also a lot smoother here compared to other areas of the face, which can sometimes make them look glossy or shiny on certain people. Now that I have the eyes and the lip details in, I usually like to take one last pass looking around my model for areas to improve. Even at this stage, I'm still stepping back and forth through the subdivisions, making larger changes in the lower subdivisions and then refining them in the higher ones. I said at the start of this detailing process that I use one main reference for the facial expression and maybe one secondary reference. I got extremely lucky with my secondary reference in that his facial expression is almost identical to the primary reference, and so it was very easy for me to line things up to my model and to continue detailing. This might not always be the case. The lighting in this reference is really helping me out with the smaller details. It's creating a lot of hard shadows on the surface of the skin, which is giving me a good idea of where the smaller volumes and cavities are. Again, the better your anatomy knowledge becomes, the easier this process will be. As my old art teacher used to tell me, the more you know, the more you see. This has always stuck with me, and I continue to try and learn something new every day. I'm going back to the neck now, and really defining those larger wrinkles with the damp standard brush. The skin on the neck is quite different than the rest of the face. We probably move our head more than any other body part during our lifetime, which will cause these deeper lines and wrinkles on the neck. The pores here are smaller, but the tissue and fat that surrounds the pores is greater and produces a kind of small bump on the hair follicle. This, in combination with the deep lines and wrinkles, can cause the skin to look leathery and worn, especially in older characters. Something that I like to do if I feel like an area is missing some noise detail is to switch to the standard brush and to change the stroke to spray and the alpha to the speckle dot image. Then, with various brush sizes and intensities, I'll spray some noise detail to break up the surface of the neck. This is also a good technique to use to break up the eyelids and the ears. After that's done, it becomes a little bit easier and more natural looking now to sculpt in the creases and the wrinkles. Like I said earlier, a lot of the neck will be covered by cloth eventually, so I don't need to work on these areas too much that won't be seen. And that's pretty much it for this detailing stage. There's always areas that you can improve and continue to work on, but you also have to balance this with when to call it done and move on to the next stage, which can sometimes be a little bit hard to do. In the next video, we're going to go over a bit of cloth sculpting techniques, as well as posing our character and exporting it out for rendering in Maya. I hope to see you all there. Cheers guys.